Let us now move from research to practice, and I'm very happy that with us here today is Esther Mwaura. She is the founder and the coordinator of GROOTS. GROOTS is a grassroots women's organization in Kenya. So please, Esther, can you share some of your insights from the grassroots?
Thank you very much, and I'm very grateful to be here. And GROOTS invest a lot in working with grassroots women who live in poor communities. We are very sensitive to how we refer to those who live in poor communities. We believe they are not poor. They are people with resources and capacity, so we invest in working with those women. And our experience in resilience building and in our traditional development work, we are alarmed how much of the work that grassroots women do is not recognized when we define policies and programs. And what is clear, and that's what Neha just said, is that if we look, we use gender lens to look at how do we program and develop our policies, we are then able to look at who is doing what, who is most impacted, what roles and differentiated capacities they have so that we can enhance on that. For grassroots women, and I think that's what Ruth said, is that they have for a long time coping with stresses and shocks. So when we do not build on what we know, we fail to build on innovative experiences that they have been able to draw to. I want to bring experiences that I have seen with grassroots women who live in semi-arid regions of Kitui. And when, for a long time, these grassroots women, when land became unbearable, most of the men and the young able men moved to the cities to look for jobs. But the women remained there, and because they did not have much capacity to till the land by themselves, they organized in many groups, and they were tilling their land in groups. And what would happen when there was very big droughts, and there was opportunity to get relief food, and they would be asked to pay with their labor, they were asked to go and do labor as individuals. They were used in the past to work as collective. And so this defranchised their capacity to work as groups. And over years now, we are seeing groups and organizations reinvest in building this group, which we would not have done if we actually understood that groups works best. Grassroots women have developed capacity to work as collectives and been able to deal with shocks and stresses. And I can give many, many examples of how we have actually failed to account for how grassroots women respond to shocks and stresses. And in our effort to do good work and to do development work that is targeted to support communities that don't necessarily impact and build on what innovations that communities do have already and know how to do best.
Let me now turn to Laura and ask whether we already have questions from the audience.
We can start with one comment and two questions. The comment is, the solution for social exclusion is social change which should be led and driven by the excluded ones, addressing the power imbalance. The first question is, how can we increase social trust between different groups in our increasingly diverse, heterogeneous, and global society, and with shocks posing an additional threat to uproot tensions and conflict between groups? And the second question is, do we think that gender issues can be solved without developing economies?
Thank you for the two questions from the audience. Who in the panel would like to take up the first question? How can trust between social groups be increased? Who would like to respond to this, Sharia? And that's all right. Okay.
It's a great question. I mean, one of the things that we found with CVA, the way that it's implemented, we actually have focus group with different groups within communities. We know that communities are not homogenous. And through having these focus group discussions and then bringing together those different communities, including various excluded communities, more marginalized communities like young women and girls, youth, various other axes of differentiation. We actually facilitate, it facilitates a wider conversation amongst these different groups that help to bring together, to build a dialogue and build a better cohesion between these groups. These are often groups that don't even communicate, even though they live in the same areas, they may not communicate with each other. So just by facilitating a community process that really brings in these different groups, it really does help to, it doesn't solve all the problems, let's be realistic, but it does start that conversation.
Thanks, Sherry. Thorat, I think you also wanted to comment on this.
Yeah, because of lack of time, I could not say many things, but joint paper by Joachim Brown and me gives in detail. Now, I think this is a very important question of trust. As I said earlier, that the affirmative action policy in favor of excluded group are met with a lot of resistance, and so there is a need to build up the trust. Now, what is the insight from economic theories? Gary Becker and Arrow, really who wrote the theories of economic discrimination, argued that the competitiveness of the market and perfect information will remove the discrimination and provide equal access to everybody. But the limitation of this theory have been now pointed out that no, decisions are taken for non-economic factor also, and the recent book by Akralov, Identity Economics, point out that the non-economic factor, that is identity, norms, social categorization, does influence your economic outcome and the decision. And therefore, you require dual policies. And several countries in the world, they have used dual policies. One is the policy of providing access to the asset, increasing the productivity, developing general program for food security, health and employment, poverty reduction. But these are applicable to all the poor. Poor belonging to the excluded communities face an additional constraint, which the other do not face. And that is that they face exclusion and discrimination because of their identity. Therefore, many countries in the world who have the groups, excluded group, have developed affirmative action policy, and there are three components of that. One is the legal safeguard against discrimination. You have law against discrimination, so you can go to the take justice under that law. But second, law by itself cannot provide you access because of the past denial, and therefore the positive step to provide asset, education, employment, and share in the political institution is provided to the excluded group so that they can participate. And I think there are several countries in the world. I think the trust has to be built on the consideration and on the understanding that there were certain groups which were denied equal right in the past and continue to deny certain right in the present, if not all, some, and they need special policies, special protection. Then I think the trust will come forth. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing this. Esther also would like to comment.
Yeah, in traditional African societies, South, West, East, and North, you'll always hear one word that it's more mentioned with the Southern African language, the Ubuntu. And Ubuntu is practice where everything that is done for everyone's good. And that is how African societies are organized. So there has never been anything in the traditional African society as lack of trust. And I think with the emergency of colonialism in most of African society, particularly where people were told you are better than the other, and of course with exclusion where people have been pushed to compete for space because they've been left out and they can't see what space exists there. That has actually stemmed up competition that we are now trying, and I think that's where that question is coming from. How do we trust each other because we have lost trust? And I think nobody knows better how to build trust and how to work together than grassroots women who are living in poor situation, who knows that the best of their times and the best of their survival depends on their social networks. And they have done many things to live together. And I think if you can study how HIV and AIDS pandemic in this continent has been stemmed down, has been stamped down by home-based care providers who, when the hospitals could not cope with the amount of pressure, it's the grassroots women who walked in from house to house, looking at those ones who are bedridden. They're the people who are taking those ones who are sick to the hospital. They're the ones who are communicating with the health centers. But we do know that it has taken a lot of time. And I think what this tells us, and I think it's from that question, we cannot underrate the role of organizing. And we must know, and I think this is very important for development partners, organizing requires resources to get people to work together.
Okay, thank you for sharing this. Maybe we can turn to the second question from the audience. What's the relation between economic development in addressing gender issue? Maybe we could ask Neha or Myra to comment on this, and maybe you can take into account this resilience angle to this question. Neha?
Well, I think they go hand in hand, and it's really hard to divorce the two. And I'll give a simple example. So much of the developing world still is dependent on agriculture, and there are many smallholder women farmers in Africa, and we know that there's a big productivity differential between male and female farmers. And it's not because women are bad farmers, but it's because they have fewer access to resources, they have fewer access to extension services, fewer access to inputs. So I mean, I think both issues go hand in hand. We need to pay attention to gender as we go along in the economic development. So I think we can't divorce them.
Thank you, Neha. Myra?
Yeah, as Neha was saying, women have, in African countries, and particularly, well, there's just a study in Ethiopia and Uganda, that you give access, even when you give access, actually, to productive resources to women farmers, their productivity doesn't increase as well as that of male farmers. So there's an issue of access, but it's more than just access. And what happens is, I think, that women have different pressures, and also that services oftentimes are not designed with women and women clients in mind, and that includes agricultural extension services. But let me continue and explain a bit. You know, as you have differentials in productivity between women and men when you give access to certain resources, also in terms of credit, a small grant or a small loan, men may use it better than women. And why? What's the question? What is happening? Are women, you know, just not as good producers or entrepreneurs? It's a very interesting reason. When women get a windfall cash that they perceive as windfall, they have social pressures, and this goes back to social networks and social pressures. They have social pressures to give away even a little bit of that cash to relatives or community people around. So they don't invest all of it in the business. Men don't have this pressure. So men invest all of it in the business. So that's the beauty of giving women a cow, an asset. Because clearly they cannot, you know, take a bit away from the cow, cut a bit away, and then keep the cow. Maybe if you give women a dozen chickens, they may give away one chicken. So part of and these are design features that nudge women to keep the money that they get and that they perceive as windfall cash invested in the business. The other, and the very interesting other way to do it, aside from giving a physical asset, or giving, instead of cash, giving in kind, is mobile phones. And the impact that mobile phones have on women's productivity and family welfare.
Thanks for sharing this very interesting insights into smart, let's say, program design to reach and serve women better. The concept of nudging, I think that is a very important approach. Let us hear from Laura. Do we have more questions from you, the audience?
Sure. So we have 3 questions. The first 2 are a bit related.
Can the panelists comment on how to apply a gender lens in resilience to shocks and stresses? So disaster risk reduction, preparedness, adaptation. And the second one is, besides building obvious capacities and building resilient livelihoods, how can we protect women from gender-based violence during disasters? So translating CDAO to grassroots level. And then the third one is, do you have any examples of programs, initiatives, or policies that look at the role of men in improving gender relations and building resilience?
Okay, thank you. 3 very interesting questions. May I just ask the panel to address any of these 3 questions you feel you would like to contribute? We had applying a gender lens in resilience programming, protect gender-based violence, women from gender-based violence, and programs that address the role of men. So the panelists would like to start? Thorat, yeah?
I think as far as the measure against the resilience with respect to women are concerned, and even with respect to other discriminatory groups, I think there are 2 alternatives and complementary alternatives. One is that the access to asset, income earning asset, the human capabilities, share in the governance, in policy making, implementation and monitoring. I think these give a solidity to the resilience. It increases the resilience. If you are assetless, less educated, you don't have say in the policy making bodies, then you are constantly susceptible to the shocks that comes in. So I think the first thing is that particularly the excluded group and the women who did not have right to property earlier, and now also there are issues. So access to asset, education capabilities and participation in governance. Whenever then such kind of shocks comes in, their capacity to deal with the situation is much better. That is first point that I will make. The second point is that whenever this uncertain situation occur, earthquake, flood, tsunami, and other kind of things, the group from the excluded community face discrimination in accessing these services. We have example in India when tsunami came, when earthquake happens, and when flood happens, that they face discrimination in accessing the services vis-a-vis others. So I think the legal safeguard or the special measure to ensure equal access to women particularly in accessing those measures and services during this, the incidences is very, very necessary. But I would insist that the capacity enhancement in terms of asset, in terms of educational capability, human resources and power and participation in governance so that they can make decisions. I can give you one example of India where in the panchayat, village level organization, it is compulsory that by rotation women became the head of the panchayat, where they take decisions, and that has brought empowerment for women. They select the programs which favors them, which benefits them. So I think the political empowerment is equally important for facing the resiliences and uncertain situations.
Well, thank you, Thorat, for sharing this experience. May I invite Esther, maybe you can also address the issue of the role of man that one of the participants in the audience asked from your angle.
Yeah, I think how do we build resilience through gender lens? I think one important thing is that we must start acknowledging and recognizing the role grassroots women play, particularly women who are living in poor situations, small-scale farmers, but also small-scale traders who in the slums and in the rural community are the ones that are actually in the supply chain of food. And as much as we want to work, and it's very important to work in big-scale value chains like processing, I think just enough to understand how women from rural communities are able to transport, and I see it all the time in matatus and buses in Nairobi, where women are transporting food to the slums in Nairobi and to the capital. How can we make it much easier for them? What kind of infrastructure investment that is required? How do we formalize the knowledge that women do have in making sure that they have for years been able to survive through shocks and stresses. And we build their capacity to do much more because we do know that things are changing. What is the additional capacity that these women require? The other thing that I think is that we need to stop seeing women and communities living in poor circumstances as victims and passive actors in development. And this must change in our attitude, the way we bring them into the spaces that make decisions on what needs to be done. So it's bringing the people who are most affected from the marginal to the mainstream, so that they are not just recipients of the work that we want to do and resources that we have, but they are active participants in defining policies and programs.
Thank you, Esther, for making this very strong point about the need to change our perspectives. Do the other panelists want to comment? Maybe Neha?
I'll just echo what Professor Thorat said about building asset bases and actually ensuring that women have greater control over these assets, not just that they own them for namesake. And I'll actually give an example from Ethiopia itself. It's a program which is, we have heard much about it already, the Productive Safety Net program, and the way it was designed, it was pretty gender sensitive. So beneficiaries were selected in a community-based consultative process where women were included. Female-headed households that are often are labor scarce were allocated to get direct support, which is the unconditional component of the productive safety nets. At the community level, they invested in building water resources and fuel wood resources so that women don't have to spend that extra time going and fetching this. And as well as women were moved to the direct support when they were pregnant or lactating. So it was it was built on all these gender sensitive ideas, which is essential when we're thinking of such large productive safety net programs.
Thanks for sharing this experience, Mwaura.
Yeah, if I can add something, I think that I think that there has been increasing awareness of the important role that women play in development, but that awareness has translated maybe in the social sectors, but in terms of the design of productive services, still they're designed thinking that they're neutrally designed, but they're not. They're designed with men in mind. One of these, productive services that is used throughout the developing world, that the World Bank and the IDB and all the IFIs invest heavily in, is training. Business management training, financial training. At the IDB, all the loans that you would see, everybody had a component of training. Well, business training programs are not designed thinking that women clients are some of the clients. And I will give you an example. There is in Peru, and if we go to the other region of the world, another region, there was a training program, and it was a randomized control experiment. And they gave training and technical assistance to women small producers. And I went and interviewed, and in fact, the training did not have an effect. It was the training combined with the technical assistance that really made a difference. And the technical assistance was just customized assistance to the women's firm. A person would go to the women's firm and say, okay, there's something wrong, you need to clean up the counters, very simple things. The training, I met some of these women, and I was talking to one of them, Juana, and Juana had a stall. And she had started going to the training program, and the training program was 3 hours a day, 3 times a week for 3 months. So in a sense that was very good because they were going to give them quality training or at least extensive training. But she started going and she said, after a while, I could not do it. So she dropped out. What happens in all these business management training programs? A lot of people drop out. And when they drop out, your sample sizes is reduced. You do not have the power of your test to see if there are significant differences. But women drop out significantly more than men do, overall, worldwide, in developing countries. And why? Was very simple. If they had adjusted the hours of the training program, so women that have to work at home and work at the stall could go to the training program, then that would have made a huge difference. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing this insight. Sherry, you also would like to comment. Perhaps you can also address the violence question that was raised by the audience. Any experience on this, perhaps?
Thanks. I think just drawing from the conversation from the panel we've just had, I think one of the challenges for resilience building is to think about is to continue to push ourselves to think about a wider range of what we think of as assets and what are productive assets. So I think it's been made very eloquently in a few different panels about one of the biggest, if not the biggest or most common shock that poor household faces are health shocks. And so investments in better health, and we know certainly from the literature and evidence around investments in nutrition, that those poor nutrition and poor health have significant economic impacts for households and have significant impacts on resilience, so the ability to bounce back from a wider variety of shocks. In terms of violence, I can certainly speak about violence from the perspective of stresses on the household. So in terms of, and I think, Neha, you made this point as well, about, sorry, I can't remember who now. Anyways, but that, when houses are under great pressure, health shocks, economic shocks, it also increases, can increase just the stress in the household. And so one of the ways that CVA, as part of our broader community development work, helps to address social issues like violence. I'm not going to speak specifically to that, but violence is through strengthening community economic development, through helping to facilitate dialogue and reduce some of the poverty pressures.
Well, thank you, Sherry. Maybe we have some more questions from the audience. Let's hear from Laura.
So the first question is there a benefit to measuring resilience specifically for women and excluded groups? And how would you do that? And can the panelists say more about youth exclusion and discrimination?
Okay, thank you for the two questions. Who would like to comment on those? So measuring resilience specifically for women and excluded groups, and the question of youth and exclusion. Who would like to start? Esther?
Yeah, and I just want to go back to the violence one, if you allow me. And I think one of the when we speak to particularly food security and nutrition, access and control, or lack of it, for access and control of land among women, it's a major violence against women. And one of the things that GROOTS Kenya has done in the country is been able to develop a model where grassroots women are working with women, particularly whose husbands have died from HIV pandemic, and orphans who have been left, and where we know that guardians are taking these children as a way of taking over their land. They take them, and when the children, the orphans leave their homes, then they are able to take over the land. And that also talks to the issue of including young people, because if children are left as children when their parents die, they will grow, they will be teenagers, they will require land. And what we've been able to do is set a program where communities have organized to protect and make public who owns land and have that data of the amount of land, how it's linked to the families so that it can be safeguarded. The women have now become part and included as part of the formal decision making. I will say in Kakamega, when we started working there in 2006, in one of the districts, there were not one single chief. But because of the work we did, now we do have 2 chiefs who are members of the provincial administrators. And they're very important because they determine when the land is being adjudicated or title is being written, who determines who is the real owner. And we also have in Central Province, in one of the districts, where we did not have one single chief. Today we have 9 provincial administrators. And we don't just bring women because they are women, but we do a lot of intensive capacity enhancement on the legal framework of the country, what it talks about laws. So it's really an integrated approach. But we also do have a program we are running with the World Bank. It's about enhancing access, market, and trade. And we realized that young people were not interested in farming. So what did we do? Part of the project allows for use of mobile to learn about where are the market prices, what are they? And young people really want to do to use the mobile. And so they are the ones that are going out, supporting women farmers, men farmers, to navigate where the prices are, and they are broadcasting the information to the women. They do not want to go to the field to farm, but they want to be coaches. They want to understand the knowledge, they want to know where the market is, and they want to have the capacity to negotiate prices. So we brought the young people to be part of the value chain by making sure they are integrated in that way.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we have only 3 minutes left, so maybe very, very quick comments, maybe first from Sorat and then from Myra. Yeah, Sorat?
I think the measurement problem, that how do we measure the resilience and the capacity to deal with the resilience, I think still the magnitude of ownership of asset, land and capital, the human resources, how much is the access to the education and the skill so that you can deal with the uncertain situation, the share in the political institutions where women can take the decision, but above all, I think one of the important measurement is that have they received a non-discriminatory access to the various sphere of economy and society. I think that is the key thing, because the women's special feature is that they do face discrimination in various sphere of life. So one can measure through various indicators their non-discriminatory participation in various sphere of life, how equally they are able to participate, with immense amount of freedom they are able to participate. I think these are some of the indicators which we can use to measure their equal participation.
Thank you. Myra?
Yes, to measure resilience on gender, I think what we need is really good sex disaggregated data. And I want to go back to what was being talked yesterday in terms of metrics. And I was also talking to the chief statistician of the government of Ethiopia, and she was telling me, there is obviously the need for new data availability that is sex disaggregated. But the important thing is there's a lot of existing data that just has not been sex disaggregated and analyzed properly. And I think that that is a big challenge, and where we really need to build the capacity of countries themselves so that they can take up this data, sex disaggregated, and analyze it in a way that is meaningful for policy decision making.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we have only 1 minute and 9 seconds left, so let me use this remaining time to draw 3 main conclusions from our panel here. And the first is the issue of gender and exclusion is very complex. It is very site-specific. The reasons can differ across situations. So it's important in our research that we are able to address it adequately, as you said, using existing data or collecting appropriate data, having the right indicators. So that is one very important insight. The second very important insight I would like to draw on Esther, it is very important to change our perspectives, not to consider people just as the victims, but to recognize their capability, to recognize their resources, to recognize their own strategies. And the third important insight, and I think we have heard a lot of interesting examples for organizations, be it government or non-governmental organizations, they need to take the issues of gender and exclusion into account when designing programs for building resilience, and there need to be smart strategies, as you showed. There may be innovative approaches, as the World Vision has told us. These are all necessary so that we will be able to adequately address the challenges of gender and exclusion in building resilience for food and nutrition security. Please join me in thanking our great panel and also the audience for
The laughter, the hearty handshakes often cloud the precarious path that the Maasai community in Laikipia has charted to overcome some of their cultural biases and challenges.
GROOTS Kenya wanatuita mkutano, wanatufacilitate kwa kweli. Na tunaeleza wasee, oye ni mbaya, hata kutandika mama siku hizi hatutandiki. Zamani ilikuwa tunatandika hawa na fimbo, hapana mchezo. Lakini sasa tunawasha hawa wawe na hiyo akili hata hawa ya kufikiria na kushangia jambo fulani mkitaka kufanya kwa familia yenu haswa.
Some say that I don't deserve to be a leader because they have never seen a woman being the chief. But the best thing with the administration, the DC, told them that she qualified. And if she qualified now, there is nobody who can say that she cannot lead.
Many people think that these women living in poverty, all that they need is charity, and they are targets of our development. And we say they are not targets of anyone's development. They are actually parts and parcel of development, and they are equal partners in designing, in implementing, and evaluating their own development.
One person's mission to transform some of the narratives that confine a woman to specific gender roles has seen an interesting debate take place in Naibor, Laikipia County. Esther Mwaura, through GROOTS Kenya, an organization she founded some 20 years ago, has been reaching out to some of the communities. With a membership of more than 2,500 grassroots organizations, all geared towards empowering the Kenyan woman, Esther has her goals set.
Everywhere we invest as an organization, we ensure that women organize in a physical space. We don't believe in women organizing under trees because we think when you allow women to organize themselves and meet under trees, you are almost saying that they do not have the ability to sit on a chair and write on notebooks and be able to be shielded when it's raining. They need to meet as they wish and at the time regardless of the condition.
The meetings are frequent and the discussions diverse. There are no pre-qualifications to become a member other than a commitment to advance and strengthen a woman's place in society, socially, culturally and economically.
Hiyo report inasema wamama na wasichana sana sana kutoka kiwango ya 15-25 ndio sana sana wanapata virusi ya ukimwi.
But when it comes to women and leadership, the challenges remain intense. In one of the stock-taking forums, the stories of these challenges are evident.
I buried my husband and had forgotten about it. So when I was getting into leadership position and vying for ward representative, I didn't know somebody could have that ill motive of coming back to my home and exhuming the body of my late husband from the grave, and then the grave was dug, the body was left there, the bones were scattered all over. It was a scene that nobody could expect.
For Esther Mwaura, strengthening the resolve of women to aspire to do more, to overcome the intimidation and rise beyond the challenges has been a childhood dream. growing up in the lush Limuru area, hers was a story of extreme poverty amidst plenty.
When we were growing up, we were all laborers for the big farms that had been bought by the rich Kenyans. In the evening, we would leave school and we would go to clean houses. We'd leave school, at that time we'd leave at 4:30, and then we'd go and clean the houses for the teachers or for the other people. And then, of course, by 7 o'clock, you're going back home. Sometimes no food, and you either go and continue with work at home. We never used to carry school fees. In fact, schoolwork, I remember my mother used to ask, why do you carry books? She never understand where you'd carry a book home. She used to say, why do you pretend you're the only one who can be who understand more about education? She tell us books remain in school, and here you come to work.
Where there is a window of opportunity, Esther doesn't hesitate to exploit it. When GROOTS Kenya realized that different communities engaged women differently, they changed strategy. In Naibor village, Laikipia County, we meet a group of men who are championing for women to lead, and it has borne fruit.
Na kweli mpaka tuwakuja kuruhusu hao hata wakiongea kwa mkutano. Siku hizi wanasimama na kuongea. Zamani hakuna kuongea kusimama. Ukitaka kuongea unabahatisha either ushike nyasi kwa mkono ama mwanaume mmoja asimame ndio mama apate kuongea.
One of the things that is very humbling, have been in GROOTS Kenya for now almost 20 years, is the fact that we've developed very good models for transforming community. Like I said, the Watchdog Group, the Home-Based Care Alliance, we have now champions for transformative leadership. And the women I work with, the staff I work with, myself, are always being called abroad to go and impact this knowledge.
Persisting gender-based inequalities in decision-making continue to deny women a say in the decisions that affect their lives. For Esther, it is never lost on her that the journey to empower, especially the grassroots woman, is far from over. For Citizen Weekend, I am Anne Mawathe.
A man's death in rural Kitui West constituency can mean a double disaster for his wife and children. Not only do they lose an important figure in their lives, they also stand the risk of losing their source of livelihood, land and home. This is the situation facing 68-year-old Josephine Bide after the demise of her husband in 1985. She was stripped of her land by brothers to her late husband, which was later sold without her knowledge. This left her destitute and unable to fend for herself and family.
Hiyo pesa makakula na mimi sikupata kitu. Lalabu huyu mtu mwingine wa kuuza hiyo samba wa pili si waojiwa ni mbai. Akaanza kunitai mimi. Akinitai mimi ngamwambia mimi sikukula kitu. Aende kwa mbai akachukua hiyo pesa zake, akalipwa hiyo pesa zake.
And 27 years down the line, there is light at the end of the tunnel thanks to intervention by GROOTS Kenya, a community-based organization.
As GROOTS Kenya, what I can say we've achieved most is to come up with the watchdog groups, which are acting like a source of justice.
According to GROOTS Kenya CEO Esther Mwaura, the organization has supported comprehensive community paralegal trainings for network members and has worked to document the work of watchdog communities in complementing the government in securing the property and land tenure of vulnerable members of the community.
The community took advantage to strip off them their properties, and you'd see the women being driven off by families, and they are told that you brought HIV to our family and you have killed our brother, so we don't want to see of you. Or the family would say that it is embarrassing for us to have orphans here whose parents died of HIV and they are thrown out. And a lot of families took advantage of this.
The situation is no different for 18-year-old Felicitas Kitheka. After the death of her parents when she was barely 14 years old, Felicitas was forced to flee what she used to call home after her relatives sold a 4-acre piece of land left behind by her parents, cutting short her education at class 8.
Results zilipoingia, akamchukua huyo mbradangu akampeleka shule. Sasa mimi akaniambia kwanza niende nikakae kwa sister yangu. Sister mwingine ameolewa. Mimi nikaenda kukaa huko. Nikakaa mwezi wa 3 kafika. Na sasa mimi sikuwa hata nikijua kama nitaenda shule. Maana yeye alikuwa ananiambia chochote about school. Mimi nikakaa hapa nikamuuliza sister yangu. Yeye akaniambia hata yeye hanjui, yeye hana pesa za kunipeleka shule, kwa hivyo akaniambia nirudi nyumbani. Niliporudi mimi nikakaa hapo. Hana chochote. GROOTS Kenya.
The group has so far resolved over 10 cases and others are on the pipeline.
For a very long time, women and land have been completely separated in this country. When GROOTS Kenya came in and talked about women getting a chance to do something about the land, I said, I'll go along with them. I said, we are going to do it together. Because women have been out of this business for a very long time.
GROOTS Kenya values that the community need to be able to say, this is the assets I own, this is the amount that they cost, and I want you to compensate. Communities who are sitting on areas that have minerals, they will move. So that's not negotiable. But how they will move is what matters. And as an organization, we are preparing the community to move in a way. They will be, one, be compensated in the right way, be relocated in the right way, and they can have benefit sharing over a long time over those resources.
There has been a failure on the side of the government. We have lacked political goodwill because most of the grabbing has been done by people in government. They're the ones who have been grabbing land, either in the county councils or in the national government. They're the ones who have been taking this land. So it is now from that point that GROOTS Kenya now comes in, because after realizing that probably there is no goodwill, political goodwill from the government, then we get involved as the communities, so that now we can say we want to safeguard this land because we want to make use of it in future.
The first one is on unblocking of land in Lari, specifically in areas of Kenali and some parts of Kejabi Ward where people do not have green cards. Court process, how far are we? Because this is one of the catalysts to grabbing, even now private land. The next question, or question number 2, is on the issue of compensation. Grabbing of public land in most cases is cleverly hidden as compensation. Because we need an access road somewhere. Now the people of Kamboro go to Nyandoma and identify the stadium so that those people who gave the access road can be compensated, so to speak, with a stadium in Nyandoma Ward. What process, or what is the right process that is supposed to be followed so that people are compensated in the right way?
If there is any reason for any private property to be acquired by government to provide access for public purpose, then the government will pay for that access, and then nothing else should happen. You can negotiate, it's compulsory acquisition, it will be valued, and the value of that portion of land which has been acquired for public purposes, not for private use, but for public use, will be compensated. If there is any other public land available public land that has not been reserved for any particular use. See, when it is a stadium or a school or a hospital or even an open space or a park or a cemetery, it is public land that has been reserved for those purposes, for those exact uses, nothing else. So it cannot be excised for private use anymore. But there will be other public lands that the county would have identified that are available for allocation, for the expansion of town or for industrial development or for residential use or for anything like that, which the county then will ask the National Land Commission to manage the process or administer the process of allocation. Then that person could be considered for allocation in that kind of environment, not to excise a piece of another public land for that purpose.
Although I'm not from Kiambu, I'm from Laikipia, I have seen as if that problem can also crop in other places, because I don't know the mechanism that you are going to use very soon as far as the illegal division of the land is concerned, because even from the radio and the media, we normally hear that if you want a good land, go to Kiambu, because they divide the plots and they move like hot cakes. So I am wondering now the mechanism that you are going to use, because the women are going to suffer. If that division will continue, it seems as if we'll be homeless and our children, I don't know now the quick action that you are going to take. Please, I would want to know.
Thank you very much for coming out very clearly. Yes, land in Kiambu goes like hotcakes. Hotcakes, it is true. And mostly it becomes done illegally. Some plots actually are not even subdivisible. And we're making attempts to, as much as possible, communicate to the population that there's some land that has not gone through the legal process. There are those documents that you need to lay your hands on to be sure that land has been properly subdivided. We've also been in touch with the various players within the process of land management. For instance, we've communicated with the various land boards to tell them they should not transact on any land unless it is received a clean bill of health from the county government. For instance, if someone is subdividing a piece of land in plots that are so small and are not developable, and they find their way to the land boards, it should be rejected at that point, because we have so many people who are buying land and getting ownership documents, but when you attempt to develop it, as per the requirements of the building code, you are not able to do so.
GROOTS Kenya is doing a good job identifying the land. We have had other reports. We have the Jonjo report, we have the Dogo report, which are all gathering dust somewhere in government offices. Some work beginning in futility, meaning that at the end of the day, all that has been done, donor money, all the effort has been put in place by the communities. And then at the end of the day, the government is not able to come in to implement and help us implement the same. So maybe coming from the Tomo and the General Commission, are we moving anywhere with what has been done by GROOTS Kenya so far?
As for the reports that are there, and Jonjo and Dungu reports, and what they say, they have identified a lot of public lands that have been grabbed, and they have given recommendation what to do with them. We are following on those. If you have seen, we have got notices going out very frequently to review all those grants. And it's not only that those that appear in Jonjo and in Dungu reports that we are reviewing, because Section 14 of the National Land Commission Act actually says we must review all grants and dispositions. And the reason that is done is because a lot of people, a lot of land and parcels that have not even come up in the Dungu and Jonjo reports have actually, a lot of them that have not appeared in there have also been grabbed. And since the two reports came out, much more grabbing has also taken place. Land grabbing is a continuous process. It is going on right now. As we sit here and talk about it, someone somewhere is grabbing land or planning to grab one. GROOTS has done a wonderful job, I must say. You have trained future trainers. that people, the women you have trained in Lari, will not only be training others in the bigger, larger Kiambu County, but I think the rest of Kenya, they will find out. You have prepared the groundwork for us as an inventory for public land, which we are going to inherit. But once you have had the inventory in place, now you start worrying about how to protect it. You must think about how to protect that so that we don't go back to where we came from.
Communities can be bigger and can be more powerful than the government of the day. And I think that is the responsibility we should take. So I would say that in moving forward, and I found it well affirmed here, is that to the national and the county leaders here, please, let's really appreciate the public participation, community leadership, so that even our work becomes easy.